Yo, what's going on? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video, and I'm not even gonna hold you guys for too long. Let's just get on to the video. Now, in this world of quirks, it wouldn't have basically been that 80% of the population wouldn't have been made up of people with strange abilities. People would dub these strange powers, this new phenomenon. They would end up dubbing it by the name quirks, but that wouldn't necessarily mean that all of the human population would have developed quirks over the years. Instead, 20% of the population would still be quirkless, identified with a certain structure of the bones in the foot. They're basically being a joint in the pinky toe. That would be what would distinguish between there being a quirkless person and a person with a quirk. Within the quirkless population, though, there would actually be an even smaller percentage of people. These people would be found to be unusually strong. They were pretty rare, though. These people would be known as deviants. Deviants were found to have actually be quite strong enough to rival even heroes at times. The most famous deviant, though, would actually be Yujiro Hanma. He would have been rumored to be capable of going head to head against the likes of All Might. Some would actually believe that Yujiro was even stronger than All Might, despite being quirkless. Others would disagree, though, believing that All Might was the stronger fighter overall. It's just that Yujiro managed to actually have, well, a better grasp on martial arts. That was the main reason why he was able to even keep up with All Might in the first place. If it weren't for the fact that Yujiro was so adept in martial arts, then All Might would actually be able to take down Yujiro with ease. Yujiro would actually be seen as a hero in the public's eyes. Yujiro, though, would actually be working for the Hero Public Safety Commission for more interesting missions, you could say. The commission would find that Yujiro was actually quite hard to control, though, since the only one they had that was truly capable of stopping him most of the time was, well, All Might. And even when it came on to All Might, due to him being the number one hero, he would be a rather busy man. Sure, they would be able to bring in some other people in order to try and restrain Yujiro, try and make him cooperate with them, but most of the time it would be a seemingly waste of resources due to the fact that Yujiro was just that strong, incredibly strong, while the others, they wouldn't be able to match his pure and raw strength. Sure, they would have some hacks abilities, but Yujiro was also quite fast as well, being able to dodge some of their attacks that were meant to restrain him. Yujiro would end up making his own sort of demands, or well, set of demands when it came on to the missions that he would usually be sent on. After all, when it came on to these missions, it would usually be some of the most bloodiest types, basically taking out politicians, taking out some corrupt heroes, and just continuously from there, just the sort of darker aspects to being a hero. Yujiro would have fought and killed incredibly strong individuals during these years, and he would actually make a rather hefty amount of money over the years as well. This would actually allow him to live a relatively lavish lifestyle, and with the fact that he would make his own set of demands to the Hero Public Safety Commission when it came on to his payments for submissions, he would never really have to worry about basically going broke at any moment. Yujiro would eventually party and meet a young green-haired woman at a nightclub one day. She would have ended up introducing herself as Inko. The two would end up having a mutual interest in each other, and some things would end up happening. The next day, though, Inko would begin throwing up out of nowhere. Inko would have realized that she was pregnant after, well, of course, getting one of those pregnancy tests. And she would end up confronting Yujiro about it. He would have actually given the green-haired woman his number during that night, but, well, he wasn't expecting for her to message him so soon. Hearing that she was pregnant with what she presumed to be his child, well, that only made Yujiro laugh. In Yujiro's mind, he would actually be hoping for another strong child that could actually give him a challenge. The last one's name would of course have been Baki. Yujiro would check up on Inko from time to time with her pregnancy, but he would be more focused on fighting, basically his career. When Izuku was born, Yujiro would actually show up to hold the kid in his hands. He would actually feel the grip of the boy's tiny hands around just one of his massive fingers. And it seemed that the kid had a pretty strong grip. It would have actually pleased Yujiro, and this would have been the first sign of Izuku's potential strength for later on in his life. Yujiro would actually take a more hands-on approach to this child, as opposed to Baki and Jack. He would have been curious as to how strong he could actually make this one under his own tutelage, considering what Baki ended up becoming, with just the goal of trying to surpass his father. And over the years, Izuku would actually grow to have a mix of red and green hair. He wouldn't have freckles though, and of course he would also have brown eyes with a green center. From the age of 4, Izuku would end up finding out that he was quirkless, but when his father ended up hearing about this, he didn't really seem to care. Instead, he would just see this as a sign that it was time to train Izuku. He would end up putting Izuku through some incredibly rigorous training. This, according to his father, would be so that Izuku would be able to get the edge against those with quirks. By the age of 8, Yujiro would have Izuku hunting for his own food in the woods. Inko would be concerned though. Yujiro would just simply go on to say that Izuku had Hanma blood in him, he would be fine. And Yujiro himself had actually gone through much harder training when he was Izuku's age, but look at him now, he came out just fine, and he's even a number 2 hero of Japan. Inko would still be worried for her son though, but she wouldn't be able to necessarily do anything considering, well, Yujiro was the boy's father. Knowing this, there wasn't really much that she could do. Inko originally thought marrying a top-rated hero would actually be a dream come true, but over the years, she would find it to be quite frustrating, almost like a nightmare. She would understand the fact that he would usually be out saving people and taking down villains. That wasn't her concern, not one bit, but it was usually whenever Yujiro was home that was the issue, because he would usually set up the most insane training routines for their child, Izuku. At times it even felt like Yujiro was trying to kill their own son rather than, well, raise him. Inko would recall one time where Yujiro tried to have their son fight a bear. Inko would have tried calling out Yujiro for how insane he was, putting the kid in such danger at the tender age of 10, but Yujiro would show no remorse whatsoever. Instead, he would carry Inko back to their house while leaving Izuku in the woods. Izuku would be forced to fend for himself and find his way back home afterwards. Izuku would end up making his way back home though, and he would actually be dragging a bear pelt too. Seeing this, Yujiro would actually look over to Inko and smirk. He would congratulate his son on a job well done, but Inko would simply be silent. In her eyes, Yujiro was nothing more than a monster at this point, and he was trying to turn their son into a clone of himself. Izuku would have proven time and time again that he was incredibly strong for his age, but every human had their limits. This was what Inko was thinking of, at least. When it came on to Izuku's school life, it would be rather different here. Izuku, due to the excessive training his father gave him from an early age, would develop at a much faster rate than the other kids. Kansuki Bakugo, the explosion brat within his class, wouldn't have thought much about Izuku at first, especially when finding out that, well, Izuku was quirkless. Now, when it came on to one day though, Bakugo would end up realizing what sort of competition he had. It was only when Izuku stepped in to protect the kid from Bakugo's bullying did Bakugo finally see what Izuku was really made of. Izuku actually did not even really step in to protect the kid. Rather, he stepped in since he viewed it as an unfair fight. He didn't care that the kid was getting bullied, he just wanted to even it out a bit more. It was 3 weak kids against 1 weak kid. In his eyes, he would be ready to have 1 weak kid and 1 strong kid up against 3 weak kids instead of just basically being, well, an unnecessary assault on the kid. Izuku learned from his father that the Hanma bloodline was superior to others, even quirked individuals, but he would have to prove that to others within his generation. Izuku would have found this as a great opportunity, since many people seem to praise Bakugo for his flashy quirk. Izuku would have been faster and stronger than Bakugo from very early on. Izuku would have taken care of the goons rather easily, and in terms of Bakugo, he would avoid the small explosions before punching him in the gut. He would end up leg sweeping him as well. Izuku's last move would of course be to elbow his opponent's back. Izuku would have been suspended for his more vicious nature, but when Inko heard this, she would end up actually telling this to Yujiro, thinking that the man would actually act like a father for once, a proper father. No, instead, the man wouldn't even bother disciplining Izuku. He would actually praise Izuku for what he had done. Izuku would continue to get into fights over the years, with him dominating almost all of them. Izuku would have been seen as a delinquent but an intelligent one. Despite his behavior, Izuku was able to actually excel in school. Izuku wanted to become a hero just like his old man, but it was mainly to continue fighting strong individuals. He'd get paid for it too, and with that being said, money was always a plus in Izuku's book. Bakugo would try to challenge Izuku to multiple fights over the years as well, but Bakugo simply couldn't keep up with Izuku's speed and strength. This would have definitely ended up being a kick to Bakugo's ego and pride overall. Izuku would react too fast for Bakugo in each and every fight, and he would end up backing Bakugo into a corner in each of those fights. The few times where Bakugo would actually be able to use this quirk to its efficiency, Izuku would simply be too fast for it to matter, since she would of course just continue to dodge his explosions. During their last year at Aldera Junior High, or is it Aldera Middle School? You guys tell me in the comments. The teacher would actually end up coming into class talking about careers, what these kids wanted to be, and these papers were basically going to determine what sort of career these kids were looking for. But then he would just dash them into the air, mentioning how he already knew that pretty much almost all of them wanted to just become heroes. The class would of course cheer hearing this, knowing that the teacher actually understood them and that they didn't have to do paperwork. But Bakugo and Izuku would simply be sitting in the corner. Of course, the teacher would end up mentioning the fact that Bakugo was seemingly going to try out for UA. And of course, Bakugo would end up showing how prideful he could get at times. Bakugo's confidence would have immediately been diminished though, as soon as the teacher mentioned how Izuku was planning on going to UA as well. The class would have been silent hearing that Izuku was planning to go to UA due to the fact that they were aware of just how strong Izuku was. When it came on to Bakugo, he used to be one of the loudest and most prideful people in each one of their schools. But of course, with Izuku around, Bakugo's confidence would have been diminished over the years. No matter how prideful Bakugo could get from having the best quirk in each of his schools, he would always be reminded though of the fact that it meant nothing in the long run. In the long run, he would still lose to a quirkless person. A deviant, but a quirkless person nonetheless. Everyone were just kind of, not really know what to say when it came on to Izuku, and Bakugo would actually want to say something. He would want to talk about how Izuku had no right to even bother trying to attend UA, but one look from Izuku would actually be enough for Bakugo to simply growl and sit down instead. As Izuku would be walking home from school that day, he would end up encountering the sludge villain. The sludge villain would want to actually take over Izuku's body. Izuku at this point in his life would stand at 5'10", with a physique similar to Baki when he was a kid, although Izuku would have ended up having a more blockier waist. Izuku would dodge the sludge villain's initial attack and he would grab a pebble. Izuku would go on to flick it over to the sludge villain's eye, piercing through it. This distraction would actually give enough time for Izuku to get away from the villain. Izuku wouldn't bother trying to fight the villain seriously, since they had a more liquid body. He could most likely break through the restraints, but he found it to be a waste of his time trying to fight a villain like this. All Might would arrive not too long later and hit the villain with an air pressure attack, amazing Izuku. Izuku only respected the strong here, and Izuku would find out from his father that the only person to be physically dominant over him was, of course, All Might. In terms of martial arts and battle intellect in general, Yujiro was still superior. In terms of raw power, All Might simply lucked out. Yujiro would be able to keep up with All Might thanks to his mastery over several forms of martial arts. Of course, Yujiro would actually be the one to confirm all of this to Izuku over the years, but hearing that there was somebody stronger than his father was kind of hard to believe up until now. Izuku, seeing All Might in person, would be impressed with how it seemed like, even with just that attack he just used, it was as if he was still holding back a tremendous amount. Izuku's hands would shake in excitement. He would have a new goal in mind, this goal being to surpass even All Might in physical strength one day. All Might would ask Izuku if he was alright, but he would take a closer look at Izuku and realize the similarities between him and his father Yujiro. He would ask Izuku for his name, and hearing the word Hanma, this would be a dead giveaway to All Might about Izuku's identity. All Might would be impressed by Izuku's physique for such a young age, though, and he would question what sort of training method his father had him on. All Might was aware of the fact Yujiro had two other sons, Jack and Baki. It made sense that Izuku would develop such a physique at an early age considering those genetics, but he would still be a bit worried about Izuku's mental state. Yujiro seemed to be a bit of a madman at times, but for the most part he was a quiet individual, just very prideful. Jack behaved like an animal in the ring, and Baki was seemingly the only normal one in comparison to the others, so All Might would be hoping Izuku was more like Baki in that aspect. Izuku would go on to mention how his training was always harsh but effective, with his father always knowing exactly what was best for him. All Might would begin to steam up though, and he would leave the area afterward. He would have wished to be able to ask Izuku some more questions, but it seemed that time was just not on his side. Izuku would head home, and he would actually begin to get ready for the entrance exams, which would be in 10 months. Knowing his father, he wouldn't simply let him get recommended, despite Yujiro being the number 2 hero of Japan. Izuku would continue to wrestle with bears and train intensely in the gym. He would even fight off groups of quirked individuals, this being in order to actually push his physical limit. Inko would be watching, though, concerned for a child the whole time. 10 months would pass in what seemed like a flash, and Izuku would actually participate in the entrance exam. In the written exam, he did rather well, managing to actually score an 86%. In the physical exams, Izuku would use his momentum in order to run his way through a one-pointer. He would take one of their metal sheets and use it to pierce through other robots throughout the exam. He would also use the sheet as a shield, which would be, of course, against laser attacks or missile attacks from some other robots. Izuku would score around 60 points from this method alone. Izuku would see other competitors beginning to run away, though. For some reason, it did not make much sense to Izuku at the time. But when he looked up, he would find a robot towering over the buildings, making its way through the city. Izuku would have realized that this was, of course, the zero-pointer. Izuku would see this as another challenge, though. He would need to get close to the robot in order to actually have a chance at taking it down. While approaching the robot, Izuku would hear somebody calling out for help. He would look down and find a brunette stuck in between some rubble. Her ankle would have actually been stuck, trapped within the slab of concrete. Izuku would pick up the concrete and use it to jab into the machine's joints. The concrete would actually mess with the robot's movements somewhat at least. But Izuku, he was not finished. Izuku would actually grab the girl and put her on his back. Izuku would grab a broken 3-pointer's body, and he would force him to actually shoot their missiles at the zero-pointer's eyes. This would mean he was basically messing with their vision and wiring. The zero-pointer wouldn't have been destroyed like cannon, but Izuku would have managed to halt them. This would actually impress the other competitors within the vicinity. Izuku would walk back to the group and hand Ochako over to Ida. He would request that he get some medical treatment as soon as possible. Izuku would have left to go take on some more villain bots. But the bell would ring right then and there. This would of course be to alert everyone in the fact that the exam was over. Izuku would tisk in disappointment, but he would accept it. Izuku would have actually ended up getting around 30 hero points from his actions back there, which would land him at a solid 90 points in general, and of course first place. Izuku would have had no doubt about making it into UA. The first day of UA would actually start with Izuku finding the classroom, only to hear an argument going on between two people. Izuku would find out that these people were Bakugo and the blue-haired boy he met back at the UA exams. Well, of course, they were the ones bickering, Bakugo and Ida, which was a complete 180 from how Ida was seemingly back at, well, the UA entrance exams. Bakugo would be told by Izuku to actually quiet down. Bakugo would call out Izuku in response, but Izuku would begin to approach Bakugo with a menacing aura. This would be stopped though by Ochako. She would have gotten in the way and actually tell Izuku thanks for saving her back at the entrance exams. Aizawa would arrive not too long later, and he would tell everyone about the fact that they were going to be required to basically put on the PE uniforms for this event, and that the class also took way too long to quiet down in the first place. The class would find out that they would be competing in a series of tests in order to actually see their physical capabilities. Izuku would dominate in pretty much almost all of these exercises. Izuku would be able to dominate. He would be top 5 within most of their tests actually. Aizawa, seeing the scores Izuku was beginning to produce, would question whether or not Izuku was really quirkless. Aizawa was trying to erase whatever quirk Izuku could be possessing, but it would only be to find out, of course, that it made no difference to Izuku, as he was still physically dominating. This would of course confirm that Izuku was indeed quirkless and that he was a deviant at the same time. Looking at Izuku's lineage though, Aizawa supposed it did make sense. Izuku was a Hanma after all, and Izuku's grandmother was even more impressive than Yujiro. Strength seemed to really run in Izuku's blood. Izuku would end up being surpassed by Momo and Todoroki by the end of the exam though. Mineta would not actually be expelled, but he would rather switch out to the general course. Aizawa would have his eyes on another purple-haired student who he viewed as having more potential than Mineta though. His only issue was that his quirk didn't seem to give him an outright physical advantage against most opponents, therefore making it hard for him to do anything in the physical part of the entrance exam. He wasn't a deviant either, considering he had a quirk, meaning luck simply wasn't on the boy's side during the entrance exams. Even when looking at the written part of the exam though, the boy did seem to be a fairly intelligent individual. It's just that life had dealt him the wrong hands. Aizawa wanted to get rid of the robot system for a while now because of this very reason, but Nezu insisted that it was a good starting point and that most students could probably switch into the hero course after proving their worth during the sports festival. And Aizawa would have plans for that purple-haired individual to really show that he deserved to be part of Class 1A. And that is how I will basically be ending off part 1 for this series, guys. It is your boy King Ainz. signing out. You guys already know the deal. If you like the video, maybe like some more, maybe check out some more of my content. Oh, and well, subscribe. Peace.